Alright, class. So for this next part, we're going to be talking about 3 different periodic trends. So if you get out your notes or notebook, and you can write for the title, Periodic Trends. It's up here at the top, Periodic Trends. And then our first trend we're going to talk about is atomic radius. So write your title, write number 1, atomic radius. And then I would split your page into 2 different things right here, into a T-chart. And on one side, we're going to talk about what the trend is. And on the other side, we're going to talk about why we see this trend. Okay? So as you're doing that, I'm going to be talking a little bit about this. So atomic radius is the size of the atom. So that's an important thing that I'd put right here, kind of the definition of it is size of atom. So it is how big it is going to be. So that's our atomic radius. And so down here we can kind of look at our periodic table, and we can look at the trend that we see. So if you're not caught up with writing the title and everything right here, I would pause the video and write that. But I'm going to start talking about the trend down here on the periodic table. So there's 2 different things that we're going to look about when we're talking about periodic trends. We're going to look at about a trend that goes across the periodic table and trends that go up and down the periodic table. Okay, so let's first look at the trend that goes across the periodic table. So you'll notice in this first line, as we go from Li to F, as we're going across, we can see that it's big and goes to smaller. So as we go across our periodic table, we go from big to small. So it gets smaller as we go across. So underneath my trend section here, I'd put gets smaller as we go across, or across and then gets smaller. Okay, that's one trend that we see. Now let's look at the trend as we go down our groups. So if we start with Li and we go down, we eventually get to CS. And you'll notice that we start off medium size and we get to pretty big. And so as we go down our periodic table, we increase in size. So as you go down, it gets larger. Or gets bigger, whichever one you want to put. So the next more tricky part is figuring out this Y. So Y, as we go across our periodic table, it's going to get smaller. So for that, I'm going to draw a little quick Bohr diagram for you guys. So if you remember, we have our element in the middle. Let's do F. F is going to have 1 ring, then it's going to have another ring around it. So it has 2 electrons, and then next it's going to have 7 valence electrons. 7. Okay, we know that because if you remember, F is in group 7A, and so it has 7 valence electrons. So that's how I figured that out. F also is atomic number of 9, so it's going to have 9 protons, or 9 electrons total. So now let's do a picture for Li. So we have Li, and it has 1, and then it has another one. So it has 2 in the middle, and then it just has 1 valence electron, because remember, Li is in group 1A, and so it has 1 valence electron. Alright, so if you notice, Li and F all have electrons that are on the same ring, or the same outer orbital. Okay, they have electrons on that same ring. So they're about the same size. The only difference is if we look at how many protons each of them has. So Li is going to have 3 protons, and F has 9 protons. Remember, protons are positive and electrons are negative. And in this class, we talk about how opposites attract. So usually the positives and the negatives want to come together. So they're going to pull in. So the positives are going to be drawing those negatives in towards them. And as it pulls in, it makes the radius smaller. So if we have 3 protons that are pulling in, these 3 are not going to be able to pull as well as these 9. These 9 are going to be able to pull those electrons in really tight. And so as we go across, it pulls them in more and more and more because it has more protons, and it gets to a smaller radius. So that's one thing that we know. Now let's look as we go down our periodic table. So let me draw the model, the Bohr model for, let's see. Let's do the Bohr model for, how about over here? Let's do the Bohr model for I. So I'm going to have an I, and then I is going to actually have 5 rings around it. 5 rings around it, and on the outer ring it's going to have 7 electrons. So I, even though I has a lot of protons in here that are going to be able to pull these electrons in to make the radius smaller, it though has now added all of these rings, if you notice. So now, since it's added all of those rings, it's made the element grow larger and larger and larger. So as you go down each group, each step that you go down, you're adding one more ring. And when you add one more ring, it makes the element grow. So let's talk about our Y's up here again. So as we go across, it gets smaller because we have more protons pulling it in, have more positive pulling our electrons in. So that's how we go across, why it gets smaller. Then down, remember, as we go down each one, we add more shells. So as we add more shells, it's going to get larger. Okay, so those two things are why we see this trend. All right, so on your periodic table, the one that you've printed out, I would label it. So you know how we've labeled, like these numbers up at the top, like the group numbers and stuff? I would label also like this. I would say gets smaller and draw an arrow going this way, so you know that that's the trend. And then I'd write on the side, gets bigger with an arrow going down. So then on the test, if I ask you a question, like an example question might be, which one is bigger, fluorine or barium? And if I ask you for which one is bigger, you can look and say, as I go down, I'm getting larger. BA is down here. As I go across, it's getting smaller. F is over here. So F is at the top and is to the right side, so it's going to be really, really small. BA is down and is on the left side, so it's going to be really, really big. So BA is going to be bigger. And then you don't have to memorize anything because you can use what you've written on the side here. So I would get your periodic table out and label it like that so that you know. All right, we're going to talk about the next trend in our next video, so make sure to watch that to learn about the next one.